and gentlemen, just a few brief announcements before we begin. First of all, welcome to Theater for the New City. Welcome to the Slave Who Loved Caviar. And welcome back to live theater. How's that now, The Slave Who Loved Caviar will be performed with one 10-minute intermission. In the unlikely event of an emergency, there are two exits that I must bring to your attention. First one is back the way you came in. The second option is in the rear right-hand corner of this auditorium. Either illuminated exit sign would lead you safely to the 10th Street side of the building. Please take a moment right now, if you haven't done so already, to turn off or mute any cellular telephones or electronic devices. If it lights up or makes noise, please turn it off right now. Also, please, no photography, no flash photography, no cell phone photography, no photography or recording of any kind, unless your name is Zohair. Lastly, the most important thing we ask is that you keep on your mask. Please keep your mask on the entire time that you are in the building. Once again, thank you, welcome, and enjoy The Slave Who Loved Caviar.
Oh, no. I can't have a Halloween party with the girls tonight. No, it's not homework. Are you ready for this? Are you sitting down? I have been invited to Baron DeWitt's Halloween party, the social event of the year. Don't you remember? He came to the poetry slam at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. He says that he couldn't take his eyes off of me. He especially complimented me on my lovely throat. Ooh, and he wants to include me in a performance piece. Isn't that so thrilling? Well, he didn't really give me any details about the piece. Just that for rehearsals, I'd have to get used to sleeping in cramped quarters during the day for authenticity. What is my costume tonight? Well, I am going to go dressed like Cinderella from the Disney movies. Ooh, and everyone's required to wear a mask. Isn't that just so intriguing? What about Ricky? Just tell Ricky I'm studying tonight. He is so immature, while the Baron is suave and charming. He's from Europe, you know. Lived in one of those castles like you see in the Viking cruise ads. Besides, Ricky isn't really my boyfriend. We've only dated a couple of times. He's as exciting as a raisin. Look, I've got to go. Ciao.
There is a detective outside. She wants to speak with you.
A detective? Why would a detective want to speak with me?
Want me to get rid of her?
No. That would only arouse a suspicion. Send her in. Who may you be?
Mary Van Helsing, Chief of Detectives, NYPD.
And what have I done to deserve rest of your company.
Cut the bullshit, Baron. This ain't no social ball. I'm going to show you some pictures. You recognize this girl? Her name is Jennifer Blue.
I'm sorry, Detective Van Helsing. I've never seen this girl in my life.
When she was last seen at your Halloween party, her roommate said that you invited her, that you wanted her to be in a performance piece.
All of my guests were wearing masks. How could I tell them apart? Besides, I'm always inviting younger people to participate in my work. Whether they be models or performers, they have to get the start somewhere.
Well, you must have a guest list or something. Maybe her name appears there.
We shred those lists as soon as a particular party is over. Our guests come from the rarefied regions of New York society. They insist upon our strength.
Well, she was dressed like Cinderella from one of the Disney movies, according to her roommate. You must remember her.
Excuse me, Baron, but the car is waiting to take us to see Hamilton.
Unfortunately, Detective, I have to leave. I have to end this interview.
Oh, by the way, the Bavarian government called. They said that you're delinquent in your property taxes on your castle. That it's overrun with rats. And when they opened the doors, the odor was so foul that several members of the police force fainted. They're sending investigators, and we've offered them our full cooperation.
Let them come. I have nothing to hide.
You sure? Well, if you hear of anything, here's my card.
What do you think she knows?
Somebody must have tipped her off.
She's on to something. I can tell. The way she looked at me, as though she can see right through me.
You think she has the gift?
I can call off an investigation if she gets too close. You know, the people who attend our parties are well connected. Some of the most important players in these towns, governors, captains of social media, generals, college presidents, and European royalty. They like their women real young. I have all their names in my black book. If I go down, they go down with me.
Well, you are the most feared man in this town. No one has the nerve to cross you, in a manner of speaking.
Those who monopolize the framing of Jean-Michel Basquiat's career might regard him as a pest, a mascot, or primitive, or a drug-crazed, coked-up maniac. He was defamed as a street urchin, a bum, and a leech. But Basquiat was not only a painter, but a filmmaker and musician whose life was the subject of a biopic. According to the New York art crowd, Basquiat's career was made when he began a collaboration with Andy Warhol. However, Bruno Bischofberger, an art dealer, says that in the 80s, Warhol normally sold nothing. Not a single painting of his dollar sign show, held at the Leo Castelli Gallery in 1982, was sold. The same thing happened when the show traveled to Paris.
Grace, what are you reading?
I'm going over my notes. Detective Van Helsing wants them by noon.
This is a waste of time. She's obsessed with this Jean-Michel Basquiat. His paintings are a bunch of scribbles in the faces of angry black men.
Eruption? I've been here longer than you. Chief of Detectives Van Helsing is no one to be messed with. She worked her way up through the ranks and survived every test that these pigs hurled at her. She promised Hilda Owen that she'd pursue her theory that Basquiat was a victim of foul play.
Hilda Owen, who was that?
She was a detective back there in the 1980s.
A woman detective in the 1980s?
You can imagine the shit she had to take. Her male colleagues resented her. Some refused to even work with her. There was constant harassment, jokes. The NYPD has changed since then.
Well, not all that much.
Look at it this way, Raksha. Now we have gay officers. The Gay Officers Action League.
Yes, but the gay pride community does not recognize them. They've been banned from marching in the Pride Parade.
That's how Basquiat felt about black officers. He caricatured them. In 1981, he painted Irony of a Negro Policeman. Then there's Sheriff, which ridicules an officer by using distortion. But I think it's better for some cops of color to be on the inside than on the outside looking in. They can intervene when their colleagues are over-policing.
We'll tell that to Carol Holloman Horn, a Buffalo police officer. She intervened on an arrest where she said a fellow police officer used a chokehold on a handcuffed suspect.
What happened to her?
The officer punched her. She was fired and she lost her pension. But this year, a judge ruled in her favor and her pension was restored. But look at all the trouble that they put her through. That's what you get for working on the inside. Sometimes working on the inside of institutions that are intractable, like the police force, can lead to misery and frustration. We even get it in our jobs in forensics.
Good point. Some say that Basquiat would have survived if he had remained on the outside, selling postcards, expressing himself by painting on walls, even on a refrigerator. I think the evidence shows that his becoming a part of the Warhol cult is what killed him. Though most of the critics, fans of Warhol, say that his death was self-inflicted, an argument could be made that he was an innocent lured into a death cult in which Warhol, according to art world documentarian Emile D'Antonio, was the angel of death's apprentice. Warhol even called himself Undertaker at one point. There seems to be a consensus among the pro-Warhol white critics that Basquiat was dependent upon Warhol.
Depends on who controls the story about the two, doesn't it? I mean, story ownership has been a question throughout world history. My grandmother, she used to say, "Beta, until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero."
Bugs and maggots are our storytellers.
I heard that.
Was Basquiat the lion and the all-white art critics establishment the hunter?
Basquiat addressed that. He said, "I think I helped Andy more than Andy helped me." If one is familiar with the style of both, a cursory glance at the collaboration would indicate that Basquiat did most of the work. Theirs was still an employer-employee relationship where the employer was reaping more profits than the employee. I'm not a fan of either, nor am I an art historian, but I could see that.
Between the two, the critics just favored Warhol because Warhol was famous.
And white, don't forget that part.
Okay, I grant you that. But another reason might be that while Basquiat was a serious painter, Warhol represented a trend that was moving away from painting. He once said that painting was dead. He concentrated on stunts, which involved brand names, like creating facsimiles of Brillo boxes and passing them off as art in museums. He spent a lot of time in grocery stores. David Bowie might have made the most profound comment about Warhol's art, that as a Byzantine Greek Catholic, he was fascinated by icons. If the Byzantine was his spiritual home, the department store was his secular home. He dressed mannequins. He had the soul of a mannequin. Though he had a downtown address, he was Madison Avenue through and through. He was at heart an advertiser. He never denied he was a commercial artist. What did you think?
Well, listen to this. Ultraviolet, the late Warhol actress, seems to agree with you. She was an intimate. She says, he learned all about screens and multiples and blow-ups and colorizations as his days as a commercial artiste. And listen to this. Among the icons by Warhol was Count Dracula. He produced a film called Young Dracula. His nickname was Drella. a cross between Dracula and Cinderella. Did Warhol get the nickname Drella because after sucking the energy of his followers, they became the living dead? And why Cinderella? Was it because he got turned on by the central image of the Cinderella myth, the shoe? In the first Cinderella story, a bird drops a sandal in the presence of an Egyptian king. The king sends out his men to find the owner of the sandal. She's a slave. Found, she marries the king, and so the story evolves over the centuries until the sandal becomes a glass slipper. John Giorno writes of Warhol, he had a secret reputation as a shoe fetishist. For years, he designed shoe ads for Bergdorf, Goodman, I. Miller, and Bonwitella. There was Andy Warhol on his hands and knees licking my Abercrombie and Fitch loafers. He wiggled his tongue and smelled. My shoes were covered with his saliva. It was a turn-on.
Ooh, that's creepy. Basquiat was hanging out with this guy. This Warhol was a sick puppy. Do you think that Warhol might have masturbated when he saw Basquiat on the cover of the New York Times magazine, shoeless?
Gross! You have to go there!
Gross. All of the crime scenes we've had to examine. You didn't seem squeamish when all that was left of a victim were a few messy body parts. And you get offended when I use a word like masturbation.
Look, I'm not ready for a case like this. There's no blood, no saliva, no drinking glasses, no cigarette butts with
Okay,
DNA.
look at it this
No.
way. There's metaphorical blood. The critics said that Basquiat gave Warhol new blood. Warhol was called a leech, so dependent was he upon Basquiat. Basquiat even wrote the words leech and parasite in one of his paintings. Basquiat knew he was being used. He was just a kid, but he knew that much.
So you got the Dracula part down. What about the Cinderella part? Do you have any ideas about that?
Yes. Sigmund Freud's Cinderella has some of the qualities that have been attributed to Warhol. Vain, selfish, immature, and power-hungry. The Marxist Cinderella is exploited, but she in turn exploits mice, birds, and the fairy godmother. Like those who worked for Warhol, including Basquiat, they were either unpaid or underpaid. Warhol studied his subjects obsessively. One of his most famous films showed poet John Giorno asleep for 8 hours.
What? You mean people paid good bucks to watch a man asleep for 8 hours?
He also did a film called Empire, which just showed the Empire State Building, also for 8 hours. He saw the building as a mighty hard-on. He got a different response, however. People heckled, booed, and threw things at the screen. Warhol said the art was in how the audience reacted.
Metaphorical blood. Grace, you always go egghead on me. I forgot that you were a classics major before you got into forensics. What made you quit the classics?
In this age of the woke, today's students just see Greek and Roman myths as one of many of the world's storytelling traditions. They barely cover the storytelling traditions of Europe. Every tribe has its Odyssey. Enrollment is down, and so I would have starved if I'd become a classics professor. I'm not the starving kind. What about you? What drew you to forensics?
My parents wanted me to be a doctor. Not a chance. I grew up watching CSI. It had to be forensics.
The Indian community is to be admired. Your people are devoted to hard work.
That may be true, but white people still call us niggers.
I'm sorry, Baron, but there were no bids for your work at the Sotheby's. These days they can't even sell fresh impressionism, the masters.
What is happening? My last painting, Mother of the Dead, sold for $2 million.
He has been doing the same painting ever since he got a crush on this redhead called Mother of the Dead. He could never have her because she belonged to another baron. He has sold versions of this painting throughout the years, but finally it is out of fashion.
Locally, we have that show at the Met in the spring.
It's been cancelled. The curator, who was once your biggest fan, has been put out to pasture, as the Americans say.
Huh?
They gave him early retirement. Blacks are running the Met now, the Guggenheim, the Whitney. The CEO of the Met described your Mother of the Dead as devoid of human figures. He is a gay black kid, 28 years old, who arrives to work on the skateboard. And they've taken the primitive art and moved it from the basement to the first floor.
But you told me that the abstract art was the trend in New York galleries. That's why I stopped doing realism.
Who can keep up with this American art scene? Nothing is permanent in this country. It is like the American singer Frank Sinatra says, "You're riding high in April and then shot down in the May."
Franca, who?
All the blue eyes, the Pope, Il Devo, Ring-a-ding-ding, the chairman of the board. He is the Italian who put the Irish tenors into retirement.
I see. But if they insist upon art with human figures, what about classical art? Rome, Greece, the Renaissance, all included human figures. What will become of the great art of humankind?
You cannot give that stuff away. It is all on eBay, going for bargain basement prices. It is happening all over. You can blame conceptual artists for this. Someone just paid $102,000 for a banana taped to the wall of a gallery.
That is ridiculous. The banana will rot.
Well, this is part of the conceptual art strategy. Art that demolitions.
Huh?
That self-destructs.
What is this conceptual art?
Well, Marcel Duchamp started all of this. His earliest version was Bicycle Wheel in 1913, which was a bicycle mounted to a stool. And then in 1914, in advance of a broken arm, which was a snowshoe. And Bottle Rack, which was just that. He coined the term ready-made for this art form in 1915 and caused a sensation when he presented Fountain, a standard urinal, at the 1917 Society of Independent Artists exhibition.
What?
He was the founding gangster of one of the longest running con games in art history, conceptual art. He wooed a naive bourgeois businessman into paying his liquor bills and putting him up in fancy apartments. These patrons may be the first of whom one might call the Duchamps. The urinal that made Duchamp famous wasn't even his. It was introduced to him by a German-born artist and poet, the Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven. He lied and said it was his. He became famous while the Baroness is dismissed as weird and strange by male art critics and biographers. Yet she is the one who signed the urinal Armod.
So this conceptual art is about signing your name to an object someone else created?
Yes. Duchamp wanted to sign his name to the Woolworth building.
You mean I've been spending the last 500 years, busting my ass, going through the rigorous process of creating a masterpiece, making sketches, buying canvases, paint, cleaning brushes, when all I had to do was sign my name to a work created by somebody else, like a scavenger.
That is the trend. These new patrons don't give a shit about greatness. They are not as refined as our usual collectors. They insist that museums make a profit and not just offer the excuse for the tax write-off. Pharmaceutical companies, tear gas manufacturers, owners of private prisons are all footing the bill for museums now. Such is the decline in taste in this country that a Chinese immigrant was caught creating forgeries of the master.
Was he arrested?
No. His forgeries are going for more money than the original. Even the art dealers and critics are corrupt. They demand that the painters they represent or write glowing reviews about their shows hand them back a kickback of a painting or two. You have painters paying galleries to have their work exhibited.
We should have remained in Bavaria.
But you said you wanted new blood, not that stale old world type, eh? Sluggish, sticky, type AB, ancient, artery clogging, as nutritious as the donut. Besides, in Bavaria, when someone gave you a show, nobody would show up because of your reputation. And I love this town. Such is the pollution in the city that seldom does one see a full moon. Otherwise, I'd be galloping around Central Park like some fucking idiot.
Agreed. You do seem best things. As for these American blood, it is so invigorating. After my excursions into the night, I returned before dawn, feeling as though I could lift 1,000 pounds.
Your state of health is excellent, but your assets are dwindling. You are almost out of the money you received from selling your English property.
What do you advise I do?
Find a black graffiti artist who would be your collaborator. This was Andy Warhol's solution. He was made to look relevant at a time when hip-hop began to take over American culture. Jean-Michel Basquiat gave Warhol new blood, according to Ronnie Cutrone, who was an assistant to Warhol. Maybe this is why he admired your father, Count Dracula. In fact, Warhol created an image of Dracula on the silk screen. Dracula biting a girl's neck.
I told you to never mention my father's name. He was how does the song go? Papa was a rolling stone. He left my mother and me scrounging around for inferior blood, the blood of peasants, while he gallivanted amongst the rich, charming ladies and duchesses with his old world style. Rumor has it that he settled in Rio and is very happy there. Lives in a fancy mausoleum, side by side to some wealthy woman that he turned. At night, they terrorize the residents of the rich, carrying off deputies. He signed over his castle to us, perhaps as a result of a guilty conscience. We wanted to turn it into a bed and breakfast, but it was in such a state of deterioration. It was about to be condemned.
I've heard this story 1,000 times. What about the collaboration, Baron?
I will never collaborate with a hip-hop artist. I be lowering my standards.
allegory, Plato anticipates the invention of film. The shadows of individuals who pass in front of a fire are projected against a wall. Prisoners view these images as reality. Andy Warhol was one of Plato's prisoners, instead of Plato's philosophers, who freed themselves from epistemological bondage, even though Warhol wrote a book entitled The Philosophy of Andy Warhol. For him, images were reality, while his life was unreal. He viewed reality through a Polaroid. But in some ways, Andy Warhol was more like Plato than any figure of the ancient world. I imagine Plato to be an icy individual, like Warhol. Someone who didn't like to be touched. Shy. As cold as a Tennessee cave.
What about those hot, sexy films he made?
Well, his models were sexy, but Warhol said that sex on the screen was more interesting than sex between the sheets. He regarded sex as work. A person obsessed with cleanliness. He harbored a dirty secret which he carried to his grave. He constantly complained about Jean-Michel Basquiat's unhygienic habits, commented on his body odor, his lack of bathing. Warhol wondered whether Paige Powell, who was in a steady relationship with Basquiat, had recovered from him, as though she had to be debriefed. He even asked her the size of Basquiat's penis. Asked whether he would have sex with Basquiat, Warhol said he was too dirty to have sex with. Warhol described Basquiat's living quarters as a pigsty. Yet at one point, Warhol's factory reeked from the smell of urine, and he and his associates created piss paintings. What? So, they say that the urine paintings were about art.
Since when has piss become art?
Some Native Americans use urine in their art. You were supposed to look into the opinions of Warhol's crowd about Basquiat. What have you come up with?
Well, some of the factory inhabitants considered Basquiat a nuisance. In his The Life and Death of Andy Warhol, Victor Bacchus dismisses Jean-Michel Basquiat as a nuisance who smoked a lot of pot. Yet, Warhol was an Obertrol and meth addict, which accounted for his loss of weight at the time of his gallbladder operation. Was Jean-Michel Basquiat merely a nuisance? Warhol was a cult leader who often humiliated his followers. An actor named Taylor Mead was so humiliated after Warhol invited people to see him film Mead's butt, when he promised the shooting would be private. Mead said that if Valerie Solanas hadn't shot Warhol, he would have. The shot killed him, but it took him a long time for him to die physically. Emile D'Antonio made the same complaint about Warhol. The filming of Drunk was supposed to be private, yet D'Antonio noticed that Warhol had invited onlookers. D'Antonio threatened to sue, and the film was never released. Warhol was a fan of the snuff films, car crashes, the electric chair. Ironically, it ended being snuffed by Valerie Solanas. After the shooting, he was said to appear zombie-like, like Dracula's victims. He had to wear a corset to prevent his guts from spilling out. Was Warhol's interest in Basquiat sexual? I mean, is that what the boxing and weightlifting were all about? The posing of Basquiat in a jockstrap, a kind of complex foreplay that would never be consummated. His obsessions with Basquiat's dates, his comments that Basquiat's underwear concealed a baseball bat. And what of Warhol's intense interest in underwear? It was inevitable that Calvin Klein and the Andy Warhol Foundation in 2018 would collaborate on a line of underwear that bear Warhol's prints.
Those are some excellent leads. Gave me some ideas for my report. This is an unusual task, but I'll do my best.
Your standards don't pay the mortgage, Bar. You have to have the huge bankroll in order to live forever. get us one of these black kids, a graffiti artist. He could be a Basquiat to your Warhol.
That is out of the question. An artist of my stature, a student of Rembrandt, someone who was on a first-name basis with Rubens, Stern, the Hooch, collaborating with a hip-hop artist.
Well, all Western artists go black when they become bereft of ideas. Irving Berlin stealing Alexander's ragtime band from Scott Joplin. Picasso copying African art. Piet Mondrian's Broadway boogie-woogie. Rimbaud and Henry Miller calling their books nigger books. Stravinsky and Gershwin writing black music. Elvis Presley stealing from Ike Turner, James Brown, the Big Mama Thornton, Big Boy Crudup. A 91-year-old Jasper Jones using a sketch of a knee made by an African teenager and passing it off as his own creation. Blackness gave these artists new blood. It'll pass. It is like a cyclical reboot. But for now, you have to pay the bills, the lavish parties, it all adds up.
Something to think about.
What about the girl?
She's having trouble sleeping in, shall we say, such cramped quarters. I told her she would adjust to the new normal. I got her here by promising her a collaboration. She'd be my partner in a performance piece talking about innocence. But now, this detective showing up, asking questions. Black woman with a Dutch name. Odd.
Well, the Dutch were the first slave owners of New York.
Didn't know that.
How does the girl taste?
Incredible! Her blood has that extra feast to it. She's the typical American girl next door, the cheerleader whom you see at the football games. But I think the Chinese cleaning woman has been snooping around where we rest during the day. I requested a new cleaning woman. I think the current one is a police spy. She speaks Chinese when I'm present, but I caught her making a phone call the other day. She was sitting in a comfortable chair, feet propped up on a stool, She was smoking a cigarette. Her favorite soap opera was on the TV, and she was speaking perfect English. And when she saw me, she switched back to Chinese. I think she's the one who's been tipping off the detective.
We should get rid of her.
No, I'll fire her.
Yes, but suppose she...
Who would take the word of a Chinese cleaning woman over mine? A baron. Yet, you want me to collaborate with Street Scum? Listen, if she causes trouble for us, we'll do with her what we did with the rest.
What is that?
If she goes around spreading tales about what happens in these houses, we put her in Bellevue.
Yes, but you have more pressing needs than that. Hook up with a hip-hop painter as Warhol did. You can pay for the maintenance of this townhouse. Pay me. I have done some research into finding a suitable candidate. There is a boy named Young Blood. He is inspired by Samo.
Samo.
S-A-M-O. Same old shit. This is the group Basquiat belonged to. They went about the Lower East Side, painting graffiti on buildings and painting on postcards.
So what if I did collaborate with these young blood? What would my job be exactly?
Well, you would insert the product names into the paintings of young blood. Yes, this is how Warhol did. Basquiat describes his collaboration with Warhol this way. Andy Warhol would start most of the painting. He would put something very concrete or recognizable, like a newspaper headline or a product logo, and then I would sort of deface it. Then I would try to get him to work some more on it. Then I would work more on it. I would try to get him to do at least two things, you know? He likes to do just one hit and then have me do all the work after that. Basquiat said that Warhol was lazy, that he did all the work. So, the graffiti artist will do all the work, which will give you time to go about your nocturnal errands. You insert icons into the paintings and you're on your way.
Icons! You know I have an aversion to icons.
Secular icons. Product names. The things you find in grocery stores.
Oh.
You insert product names into the paintings done by him. Said this was Warhol's job. His philosophy was that if an item is in a grocery store, it is a shopping item. If it's in a gallery, it's art. Him and his members of his factory made facsimiles of Brillo boxes, Heinz tomato ketchup, Del Monte peach halves, Mott's apple juice, the Campbell's tomato soup, and the Kellogg's cornflakes. Did not begin with him using Basquiat. Warhol had told Emile D'Antonio that he had quit painting and that his painting was done by Bridget Berlin.
Is that all? I just have to insert brand names into his paintings.
It is as simple as that. Feed him caviar and cocaine. Let him order food from Grubhub account from White Castle. This way he'll work 24 hours a day and be very productive. Create a studio in the basement where he can work. This is how his agent, Ananina Nossier, treated Basquiat.
Let's do it.
Raksha, do you have something about Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula and Warhol?
Yes, I do. I did find something. Like Bram Stoker, Warhol was a sickly child whose only contact for one summer was with his mom and a Charlie McCarthy doll. Maybe that's why he anticipated a time when humans would marry non-human entities, like Aija Rita Eckloff Berliner Mauer. She married the Berlin Wall in 1979. And Erica Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower in 2007. In 2015, Floridian Linda Ducharme announced that she was in love with Bruce, who is a Ferris wheel. And when Bruce was in that shape, she, like a good wife, donated $100,000 for his restoration. In 2016, Zhang Jiajia created a robot, named her Ying Ying, and married her. In 2012, Babylonia Ivaz vowed to love and cherish a Seattle warehouse in front of 50 onlookers. Oh my God. In the late 1950s, Andy Warhol said that he was in love with his television set, but eventually married his tape recorder, which he called my wife.
I'll bet that Plato was in love with the Parthenon.
There you go again, showing off your classical learning. Let's go get some coffee.
Good idea. The relationship between Andy Warhol and Basquiat was more like that between a primatologist and a creature than one between two painters. He spent more time observing Basquiat's comings and goings, his dining habits, than contributing to their paintings. He was a voyeur for whom the lives of others were more interesting than his own. Warhol took copious notes about those individuals who fascinated him. An heiress named Taxi, aka Edie Sedgwick, for example. No wonder Basquiat at one point said that he was treated like a monkey. Or as one artist said, his contribution was intuitive primitivism. Basquiat was like Oda Banga to Warhol and his circle. Oda Banga was the twa who was placed in the Bronx Zoo because they couldn't determine whether he was human. Of his reviewers, Basquiat said, "They're just racists. They have this image of me, wild man, monkey man, whatever the fuck they think." But aren't the signs of a primitive that of aping things? Warhol made his reputation by duplicating the creations of others. Even after his death, there are those suing him for plagiarism. When asked to respond to critics who said that he wasn't original, he agreed with them. When asked why he copied others, he said, "It was easier." People were amazed that the two so different would become collaborators. Basquiat included strong black militant references in his work. 80% of the faces in his paintings are angry. It's as if he painted with a shotgun instead of a paintbrush. Warhol interviewed Nancy Reagan and worked for the Shah's brutal fascistic peacock throne. Basquiat fought injustice. Early on in Basquiat's career, a young graffiti artist named Michael Stewart was caught drawing the words "Per Nema" on the subway. He went into a coma and later died after a beating by the NYPD. Basquiat made a furious painting called Defacement showing cartoon-drawn cops beating Stewart. Was Basquiat inspired by Miles Davis? Charlie Parker? Ishmael Reed disagrees. No. Too gentle. Too cool. Miles' playing was described by a critic as sounding like a man walking on eggshells. Basquiat crushed eggshells in his hands. His paintings were not a songbird, but a black vulture. A black vulture attacking a cow. Music in Basquiat. Maria Callas? No. Howlin' Wolf. Junior Wells. Big Maybelle. These paintings sound more like Earl Bostic, Illinois Jacquette, Big J. McNeely, Arthur Brysock, Dizzy Gillespie, Art Blakey, Webster, Louis, brassy, hot, provocative, belligerent, in your face. By contrast, Warhol partied with members of the Reagan administration and Nancy's beautiful white people. The relationship was also like that between an employee and an employer in one of those company towns before child labor laws. In these towns, the workers were not only exploited by the bosses, but had to pay the bosses rent.
Funny that you would say that, Grace. Look what I found. Basquiat rented an apartment in a building owned by Warhol. Basquiat paid Warhol $4,000 per month while maintaining residences at five-star hotels like the Ritz-Carlton. So, when Basquiat wondered out loud whether he was a mere quote-unquote flash in the pan, Warhol wondered whether if this was true, how would Basquiat pay the rent to Andy Warhol Enterprises? So, he was making money off the kid going and coming. He wasn't the only one.
hadn't been eating breakfast, dinner, or lunch for that matter.
Wait, yo, aren't you Jack Brooks?
The same?
You were big back there in the 60s. What happened?
Abstract expressionism went out of style. That's what happened. We was hit with a tsunami of pop art, conceptual art, graffiti art, earth art, installation art, animation, and other upstarts. The people wanted human figures in their paintings again.
Hey, you know, I never understood why you black guys went for that abstract style of art. Art with no feeling, no guts, no humanity. A chilly, aloof, white aesthetic. All form and no feeling. I mean, can you imagine someone being moved to tears upon viewing a Clifford still? Hey, but you guys had your fling. Painting forms that can be found in any geometry textbook. Preferring color over content. It's no wonder the CIA preferred your work over political art. Hey, but so did the capitalists. You know, no risk of someone like Lenin showing up in a picture. Thousands of provocative, political, and stirring pieces of socialist art were destroyed so that, abstract expressionism could thrive.
For a while. But our world began to crumble on Halloween, October 31st, 1962. We abstract painters got tricked and treated. It was the very first showing of the original pop artists. Warhol, Lichtenstein, Siegel, and Indiana. The homophobic abstract expressionists were done. And this so offended and outraged the old guard. De Kooning, Rothko, Motherwell, etc., that they resigned from the Janus Gallery in protest. These macho types who hung out at the Cedar Bar, drinking, and sometimes fought all night. As Fielding Dawson put it, when the bars closed at 4 a.m., they looked for a chick to take home. And since we copied everything that they did, we went out of business too. Abstract expressionism was the only way that the white galleries would accept us. It was our ticket to the big time. So now what are we going to do? A lot of us got our start doing political art. And then when the backlash came against political art, when that backlash came to political art, our world was destroyed. Oh, that backlash. So, when that backlash came against political art, you see, our world began to crumble.
Well, you know, wait, that's not gonna happen to me. All right, see, Baron DeWitt, he's asked me to collaborate with him. This is an honor. And answer me this. Why did you guys think you were any different than the early slave painters? Calling yourselves the vanguard. You were like them. Doing art to please white people. Portraits that flattered white people, members of the slave-holding aristocracy. I mean, like you, black painters of that period were doing escapist landscapes while the country was teetering toward a civil war. Oh, they were painting apples and oranges while black poets and orators were risking their lives by agitating against slavery. I mean, at least black poets at that time addressed the issues of the day. While black painters, they were eager to drop out. So there's no difference between you and them escaping the turmoil of the day, running off to Paris and Rome, like you escaping the real world for a world of form. Hey, but you can understand why black painters of that period would shy away from political art, since any sign of dissent could get them killed. But what was your excuse? That's right, you figured black people couldn't afford to buy paintings. So you sold your soul to the highest bidder. Sellouts. And I went to that black show at the Brooklyn Museum. The only work that made sense was Norman Rockwell's illustration of the federal marshals escorting that little black girl into the segregated school.
Do you think working for the Baron is going to turn you into a Malcolm X with a paintbrush?
It's a start. Look, working with Warhol, it put Basquiat in a position to paint work that was political, like Basquiat's defacement.
They gonna do the same thing to you that Warhol and that debauched bunch did to Jean-Michel Basquiat. Kill him with parties and drugs. After they absorbed his vitality, they abandoned him. What they wanted was his new blood, as Sotheby's put it.
Yeah, you wish you had it like that. It's just like you elderly black people afraid to seize an opportunity. Look, I can't waste my time talking to you any longer. You're a fading anachronism. And we're the woke generation! Woo!
You don't get it, do you? They see you as a savage. At least we abstract painters had our dignity. No matter how fierce we were as competitors. And how can they call you a primitive outsider? I read in Art News that your father was an optometrist. And that your mother was a school teacher. And you went to art school. You're one of those middle-class black kids who spent a couple of weeks in the hood. We call it a hoodie hip-hop song. That's a hit. They fake their biographies, tell everybody, I grew up in Bed-Stuy. Whereas their actual address was Scarsdale. You look silly in that costume, by the way. Aren't those the colors of Marcus Garvey Universal Negro Improvement Association?
Marcus who? All right, well, the Baron asking me to collaborate with him is the biggest break that's come in my career. As for this outfit, Wick is introducing me at a press conference as a collaborator. He told me to dress this way for publicity.
You sure collaborating with the Baron? You sure you want to do that? He lives in a townhouse uptown. Scene of weird happenings and strange parties. Some are known to enter, then go missing. And anytime the Baron DeWitt enters the scene, people say they hear the sound of wolves. And why do you suppose he scheduled a press conference at night? Don't you find it odd that no one sees him during the day?
You're just jealous that he didn't choose you. An old school loser. You had your chance. Because you old farts making me sick. Ain't nobody tell you to abandon the people and do that sterile European thing.
Another lost soul. Okay, don't say I didn't warn you. You're nothing but a mascot to the matter. Another lost soul. I was naive too. Put all my faith in the solidarity of New York painters. When the Whitney Museum announced that they were going to do a black show, I felt that we had arrived. But Oliver Gray called. it said that many of the black painters were going to not attend the show because the curator was a white person and who didn't know our culture. So a lot of the black painters heeded Oliver's demand and withdrew their paintings. Some didn't and crossed the picket line. But guess who was one of those who crossed the picket line? Oliver Gray. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me. He just about ran into the building. He asked all of us to join into a boycott, which he violated. He wanted to be at the top of the heap. And as a result of his treachery, Oliver Gray's reputation soared, with the rest of us out of the way. Boy, I was mad. So I went to his loft. And we got into a fierce argument. After that, he disappeared, never to be heard from again. At the height of his success, he disappeared because I killed him.
You're saying that an art dealer encouraged Basquiat to do drugs so that he would produce more work? That's a pretty serious charge, Raksha.
No one's saying that Anina Nosei supplied him with drugs. She, like the others, just looked the other way as long as they were gaining profits from his labor, energized by his cocaine habit. Listen to this. She placed him in her basement, given Basquiat's setup there. Some called it a dungeon. He was now in a position to buy a lot of drugs, which was okay with Nosei. The drugs led to his producing more. Slaves and workers were treated in a similar manner, the only difference being that they were forced to take cocaine by their employers and masters to increase production. Cocaine helped Basquiat meet the demands of Nosei, who rushed his paintings into the market even though some were unfinished, sometimes at a rate of 6 paintings per week. That's how Anina Nosei treated Basquiat. Of course, he had imbibed drugs before, but now with the money made by the paintings she sold, he increased his intake of drugs.
He could have said no.
He was just a kid, Grace. She gave him enough money to rent limousines, buy Armani clothes. He got paint all over it. He was propelled from living on the streets to fame, money, drugs, women. It was too much. He was only 22.
He got paint all over the Armani suits.
He was known to lose expensive clothes, leave them in restaurants. May I continue? Collector Doug Kramer remembers he was painting away. He looked like a slave, or very close to it. Rich white people were invited to the basement to gawk at him as though he were the Elephant Man. Sculptor Arden Scott describes the visit. There was coke falling all over the place. It was so awful, it made my skin crawl. It was really a bad model to have an artist in the basement making work. said Diego Cortez, the curator of the show New York New Wave, which was the first art exhibit to include Basquiat's painting. It was like, I've got this black labor in the basement. Look at this kind of zombie freak circus person making art. Basquiat said that he was treated like a mascot, though the whites who write Basquiat books view Andy Warhol as a father figure who showered Basquiat with kindness. It was Basquiat who got him to paint again. Unlike Warhol's disciples, Emile D'Antonio saw through the spin put on the relationship created by Warhol worshippers. To most people, Jean-Michel dominated Andy. Andy had been victimized. But I saw it quite the other way. I came to the conclusion that Andy was the prime mover of a fairly evil thing in relation to Jean-Michel. Photographer Christopher Marcus, who introduced Basquiat's work to Warhol, saw the relationship as yet another example of vampire lesbianism.
I'm impressed. You put a lot of work into this. Originally, you said that this assignment was a waste of time.
It caught my interest. I stayed up until 4 a.m. putting two and two together. Check this out. Basquiat was even more like Cinderella than Warhol. He was abandoned by his father and a schizophrenic mother. Cinderella's father betrayed Cinderella by marrying a nagging, prying bitch who was jealous of her. And then, like her mother before, he died on her. The stepsisters were envious of Cinderella, like stepsister Warhol was envious of Basquiat. There were no happy endings for either Basquiat or Cinderella. Cinderella married a prince, but he was overthrown by a coup, and Cinderella was placed in a dungeon. And like Miles Davis, another Cinderella, Basquiat's prince never came.
Congratulations on your show. I thought Youngblood, your collaborator, would be here. What happened?
He came down with the flu.
Well, his work is not as impressive as Basquiat's, but it'll do. What was your contribution to the show?
Oh, my contribution. The logo for Tabasco sauce. Did you enjoy it? That was my contribution.
Yes, well, the young blood is lucky because he is hitchhiking on the Baron's name.
Yeah, it looks to me like the Baron is the one who's benefiting. I checked your sales. They're pretty low. Seems people are getting tired of this sketch of the mother of the dead, your obsession.
Yes, we've heard this criticism before.
Well, why did art critics making such a big fuss about Youngblood's picture of Archie Moore? That don't look like no Archie Moore to me. Looks like something a child could have drawn. And then, what is this thing with the crown on his head? And he went to some fancy art school, so he knows how to spell.
We instructed him to misspell. What would graffiti art be without bad spelling? Bad spelling is trending. Art of Youngblood's genius is the fact that he is raw, powerful, and untamed. As for the crown, this is an homage to Jean-Michel Basquiat, who was his idol.
Yeah, I hope he gets better. Still, it's strange that he would miss the opening of his show.
Well, we have to get to the reception.
Is that all?
Yeah, well,
Detective.
you can go, but I'll be checking in with you from time to time.
Well, I'm glad to cooperate, Detective. But in the future, I want you to call ahead instead of just showing up.
This ain't no Europe. Barry. We don't recognize no titles over here. We show up when we wish when a kidnapping is involved.
I thought that when I sailed into the New York Harbor and saw the Statue of Liberty, I thought this country would be different.
It wasn't you who said that the Statue of Liberty had to be sculpted by a European artist because America has never produced a first-rate sculptor.
It is late. We have to get going.
I bet they're doing to this new kid, this new child, what Andy Warhol and his band of vampires did to Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was exploited by those art dealers and collectors. They got new blood, all right. He thought they were his friends. That's where that naive child went wrong. They were no friends of his. They were out to make money. That child died at 27, and they're still using him. Birdolph Goodman selling the sketches for $2,000. Tiffany and Company using his painting in a full-page ad in the New York Times, November 6, 2021. A clear case of commercial slumming. Well, there's Louis Vuitton publishing his books. The black woman who preceded me, one of those historic first hires, she told me that she tried to tell a precinct captain back there in the 1980s that they were giving that child heroin, but he would hear none of it. He told her she was an affirmative action hire and she should stay out of trouble and not get involved in things that were above her pay grade. Black cop pulled her aside, and he also told her that Andy Warhol was not only a powerful celebrity, but he owned buildings. A black cop pulled her aside and told her that the department had a hands-off policy when it came to the rich, white, and powerful. But when it came to the blacks and the hippies, the walls of the 9th precinct were caked with their blood. She failed to save Jean-Michel. Maybe I can save this new fool. This precinct captain can't be as crass as the one she worked under. Times have changed. He can't control me. He tried to tell me that I was spending too much time on this case of this missing black girl, Jennifer Blue, and that the Baron was complaining about me pestering him. Captain tried to walk away. I grabbed him by his collar and I told him, "Don't be walking away from me when I'm talking to you." Shocked, cops in the precinct gathered around. I said, "You nearly call in the National Guard when a white girl goes missing. Now, news media be broadcasting missing white girl around the clock. Look at that no singing, no dancing Britney Spears trying to free herself from her father. She ain't even kidnapped. And that's all you hear about is Britney Spears, Britney Spears. She gets more coverage than the Lord's mother." Well, he said all nervous like, "I'll give you another week." I looked that sucker right in his eye, and I told him, "I'm not leaving this case until I find out what happened to Jennifer Blue."
One critic called Basquiat Warhol's mascot. When the mascot behaved, he was rewarded. When he misbehaved, he was punished. During a trip to Milan, Warhol physically assaulted the boy, which must have reminded him of the blows he took from his father. Warhol boasted about it. Warhol was upset because Basquiat received more attention in Italy than he did. Warhol was cruel to his children. Was Basquiat one of those young people harmed by his association with Warhol? Basquiat fit right into the well-established Warhol youth culture mythos, according to Dotson Rader, who had written about his warped Pied Piper role in a 1974 Esquire article entitled, "Andy's Children, They Die Young." Wrote Rader, "He's like an overindulgent scoutmaster who slips the kids grass and ignores the sounds coming out from the pup tents at night. Warhol is a father figure to the kids around him, but he's an insufficient one. He listens and watches, but can never come up with more than an, 'Oh, really?' to their needs." Paige Powell was so concerned about Basquiat's drug addiction, she asked Warhol to intervene. Warhol's response, he said, maybe he wants to be the first one to go out early. In a review of Warhol's The Philosophy of Andy Warhol, Barbara Goldsmith wrote, "The important message is how Warhol managed to make himself into a machine-like presence devoid of empathy. He had a falling out with Edie Sedgwick when she and Bobby Dylan had a relationship. Maybe he expressed no empathy because he himself thought he was a teenager." The same reviewer said that Warhol's musings came off as the musings of a teenager. Basquiat even asked Warhol's permission to marry his girlfriend, Paige Powell. But the father was absent when they needed him. After he'd gotten everything from them, Edie's beauty, Basquiat's potency, they were cast aside. When told that Edie Sedgwick might commit suicide, Warhol quipped, "I wonder if Edie will commit suicide. I hope she lets me know so I can film it." Losing the affection of the father, like Cinderella, whose father, a baron, died when she was a kid, Sedgwick and Basquiat became what sociologist Phyllis Chesler would call father wounded, wounded by Warhol. Both died at almost the same age, between 27 and 28, from overdoses. Warhol could not aid these young people. Warhol made a similar remark when he heard of dancer and choreographer Freddie Herco's suicide. The Palace of Dragon Prince and Villanelle by Herco premiered at Judson Memorial Church, featuring a rising star named Carla Blank. Warhol said that he had wished that he had been able to film Herco's death too. Herco was 26. Overhearing this remark, Warhol's screenwriter Ronald Table said, "Sometimes I admit that his coldness was shocking. Some of his responses that he made to the deaths at the factory I could not believe." Table tried to sue for payment for his screenwriting. Warhol's hiring of a fancy lawyer discouraged him. His obsession with suicide became so intense that he made a black silkscreen painting based on a photograph given to him by a policeman that showed the scene where a young woman had leaped to her death. She was lying face down, crushed on the brick pavement in the courtyard, having fallen from the 8th floor window. Warhol made a joke about the suicide of hundreds of Jim Jones followers, said that if they drank poison Campbell's soup instead of Kool-Aid, then he, Warhol, would have made the news. Ha ha! But wasn't Warhol a wig-wearing minor Jim Jones? Is there such a thing as foul play by neglect? I'll email these notes to Grace.
Jack Brooke turned himself in for the death of Oliver Gray. The
famed black abstract expressionist, was convicted of manslaughter today. The judge sentenced him to 2 years in prison. Before he was led away to begin serving time, Brooks moved some of those present in the courtroom to tears as he pled his case. After many years of bad luck, Jack Brooks received some good news when the judge who had collected some of his paintings presided over his trial. The judge sentenced him to serve time in a minimum security prison.
Judge, thank you for granting me this opportunity to make a statement. Your Honor, members of the jury, audience members. First of all, I want to extend my apologies to the members of the Gray family for my being responsible for Oliver Gray's death. It was an accident. And as I said when I was testifying, I was steaming about Gray's deception when I went to his Soho loft. He pretended not to be home. But when one of the residents exited the building, which you had to press a buzzer to enter, I entered. His door was open, and he was startled by me. I grabbed him, and we began to wrestle. He fought back, and he was getting the best of me. But I had forgotten that he'd been a boxer when he was a member of the Navy. But then he stumbled and hit his head on the radiator. I tried to revive him. I tried. But it was useless. And I panicked. Yes, I could have called the police. But since there were hundreds of black and brown people in New York jail who are innocent and who can't make bail, I didn't want to end up in some place like Rikers Island, America's Devil Island, where I could be murdered. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my background. I came from a region of the country where farmers were moved by the true populist attitudes that emphasize cooperation, where the needs of the individual were subsumed under the needs of the group. I was not prepared for the fierce competition, for the few positions open to black artists in the city of New York. And that accounts for the cut and shoot attitudes among black artists. You see it in the murders that the young rappers inflict upon each other. And this extends to the fights over which jazz musicians will sign for gigs and record contracts. That's what brought me in conflict with Oliver. I got tired of hiding and living among the forgotten. And it's when I encountered young artist Youngblood that I decided to turn myself in. Artists like me provide a bridge to the past. Someone who can tell younger artists about the issues and the questions that confront my generation. So they don't start out at zero or a blank slate. Like Jimmy Santiago Baca or Malcolm X. I will use my time wisely, improving my artistic skills, imparting wisdom and instruction to the untapped talent available in the prison where they send me.
Order in the court.
The audience was so moved by Brooks's statements that one of the hardened guards embraced him. So we know who killed Oliver Gray, but who killed Jean-Michel Basquiat? The decadent Warhol circle? The insults from museums like New York's MoMA, which said that exhibiting his work would be a waste of space. The commissions that had him turning out work 24 hours per day from a patron's dungeon. The insults from whites in the United States and abroad, both from art world insiders and from those who crossed his path in everyday life. Phoebe Hoban, in her Basquiat, A Quick Killing in Art, wrote, "He was treated weirdly, strangely, like he was an oddity. People were entertained by him, fascinated for the moment, but would sooner or later throw him away. Or he was feared, you know? Just genuinely feared. No matter where he went in the world, Basquiat was pulled over. A white photographer recalls, in Paris, with guns drawn, the police asked if a woman who had fallen asleep in the backseat of his car was dead. Was he killed by the critics? Basquiat stopped talking to Warhol after reading their texts.
Can you read some?
Particularly nasty, vicious, and cruel was Hilton Kramer, who wrote, he was essentially a talentless hustler, street smart but otherwise invincibly ignorant, who used his youth, his looks, his skin color, and his abundant sex appeal to win an overnight fame that proved to be his undoing. Yet for a few vertiginous years before he died of a drug overdose in 1988, big-time art dealers were vying for his work. Critics were singing his praises, and collectors, almost as ignorant about art as Basquiat himself, were outbidding each other to acquire his daubs and scribbles. Basquiat accuses the art dealers of pimping him and the art critics of being maggots. Maggots on his corpse. Though one of the art dealers, Mary Boone, is depicted in stories peddled by white writers and Julian Schnabel as someone who was burdened by her relationship with Basquiat. One critic had it right, calling her a sort of female Sammy Glick. Mary Boone went to prison for tax fraud. She received 30 months. She spent $800,000 on an apartment renovation and a $19,000 shopping spree at Hermes and Louis Vuitton. Did she pilfer money from Basquiat?
The emergence of critics from colored backgrounds has rendered such white ethnocentric pronouncements obsolete. Who was the primitive? Basquiat, who drew inspiration from multiple traditions, or his white critics, whose devotion to white supremacy and whose narrow Eurocentric education rendered them incapable of detecting how these traditions influenced his work. The reaction to these new critics has generated the kind of typical mass hysteria that bursts to the surface in the US from time to time. Instead of requesting a refund from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, which provided them with a fake Eurocentric point of view, as useful as a fax machine when assessing the complex racial history of the United States, they strike out, accusing their critics of identity politics because they resist identifying with them.
Nothing new. The Emperor Hadrian gave the Jews a hard time because they refused to Romanize.
The Emperor Hadrian? There you go again. What does the Emperor Hadrian have to do with anything? Isn't he the one who built some silly wall in England?
Basquiat frequently cites the classics in his work. Besides, in his paintings, Basquiat shows he's very familiar with the Western classical tradition. In his painting Jawbone of an Ass, 1982, Aristophanes, Socrates, and Sophocles are cited.
While you've been rummaging through the classics, trying to find an analogy between some emperor and Basquiat, I interviewed a Native American critic, Charlene Touchet, who has a different point of view, which Kramer and other white critics, viewing themselves as members of the master race, failed to discern. She's an artist who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Touchet said, "Not surprising that Eurocentric critics ignored the native influence on Jean-Michel because they had no way of knowing that he had seen the art I showed him. And even if they did, they would have probably not acknowledged it since they didn't value anything American Indian. By the way, these Jean-Michel Basquiat paintings also show the influence of contemporary Indian art on his compositional style, use of pictographic symbols and indigenous political ideas, and his use of imagery associated with Indians, like arrows, teepees, horn figures, or masks, and barbed wire signifying reservation confinement." Jean-Michel and I also spoke about how he connected with his Indian ancestry too. Invincibly ignorant, Basquiat knew Western art and did parodies of the work of the masters, not as a copycat, but as a jazz musician would take the chords of a Tin Pan Alley classic and reharmonize them. But he wandered into territory deemed off limits to Kramer and his white supremacist posse. Basquiat knew African art as well, having traveled to Africa. Basquiat was eclectic, multicultural. Kramer was stuck in his taste, unmovable, the narrowest of Eurocentrics. So why should we accept the terms they use to define Basquiat's art? White critics, knowing little of the traditions of others, attempt to define them using their terms? Neo-expressionism, primitive, Afrofuturism. Why not neo-indigenous? They said that he must have been influenced by Jean Dubuffet. Basquiat told them that he had not been influenced by Dubuffet, and they called Basquiat a liar.
Raksha, I found Robert Hughes's comments to be equally cruel. Like other advocates of high culture, Hughes said that whenever blacks or women make strides, it's due to political correctness. We hear that all the time around here. He wrote, "Monochrome late American art industry felt a need to refresh itself with a touch of the primitive. The reputation may survive, or it may not. If it does, it will only show once more As if further proof were needed that a perch in the pantheon of the 1980s does not necessarily depend on merit. His stardom was waning badly when he died, because the fashion that had raised him up was already tired of him. Syringes flung cruelly by the zeitgeist. The only thing that brought Basquiat back into the spotlight was his death. And listen to this. Those who provided the research for the TV news show 60 Minutes planted Hughes' idea in Morally Safer script. Shown with a group of black school children at the Whitney Museum of American Art's retrospective of Jean-Michel Basquiat's work, Mr. Safer asks, "Do you think you could do as well?" "Yeah," responds one of the children. "I could do better than that." Of Basquiat as an artist, Mr. Safer explained to viewers that in 1988, when his popularity was declining, his career was saved. He died of a drug overdose, and now that there would be no more Basquiats, the market fell in love with him all over again. Yes, he died of a drug overdose, but who led him there?
Are you saying that someone killed him with an overdose?
No. They said the conditions, the atmosphere which led to his using drugs excessively.
Well, another so-called critical analysis came from Vivian Rayner, who published her review in the New York Times of the 1985 Tony Shafrazi Gallery exhibit featuring the collaboration of Jean-Michel Basquiat and Warhol. The two artists had a falling out after the show drew criticism. Was Basquiat exploited? When discussing this show of Warhol and Basquiat's collaborative works, she stated in an almost racist tone, "Last year, I wrote of Jean-Michel Basquiat that he had a chance of becoming a very good painter, provided he didn't succumb to the forces that would make him an art world mascot." Judging the collaboration, Rayner said that Warhol scored a TKO over Basquiat. Well, since Basquiat did most of the work on this collaboration, and Basquiat was from Brooklyn, using Rayner's boxing metaphor, she might be guilty of a Manhattan hometown decision. Well, Basquiat was not the only one who accused Warhol for taking credit for work that wasn't his. Lynn Goldsmith was successful in winning a lawsuit against Warhol on appeal in March 2021. After the Second Circuit Court of Appeals reversed a 2019 ruling from New York's federal court, finding that Andy Warhol had made fair use of Goldsmith's 1981 photograph of Prince when he created the Prince series. Goldsmith appealed that verdict, arguing that the Warhol artworks were not a transformative use of her image. "We agree," Judge Gerard E. Lynch wrote, "the Prince series works are substantially similar to the Goldsmith photographs as a matter of law." Now, those who posed as Basquiat's friends exploited him in a different way. Filmmaker Jim Jarmusch explained why he refused to see Julian Schnabel's film about Basquiat. He says, "I knew Jean-Michel, and he was not friends with Julian. I like Julian very much. He's a very generous guy, even though he's an egotistical character. I refused to talk to Schnabel about Jean-Michel when he was making the film. Jean-Michel was not a fan of Julian as a person back then, and I would not betray him in that way."
Basquiat's female companion, Paige Powell, says that Basquiat ridiculed Schnabel's work. In the film, Paige Powell is depicted as an innocent who martyred herself on behalf of a crazy, unreliable, so unreliable he stood up Mary Boone, who was receiving a 50% commission on each painting she sold.
Well, Andy Warhol dismissed Schnabel as pushy, a bad painter who visited other people's studios to see what he can copy. Schnabel stood in front of his paintings and explained to everybody what they meant. Schnabel's film Basquiat should have been called the Schnabel Home Movie. It shows that those who pretended to admire him were just as insensitive about the painter as Kramer, Rayner, and Hughes. Schnabel, who boasted that he is as close to Picasso as we're likely to get, becomes Basquiat in a twisted way. Well, since Basquiat's father didn't grant him permission to use the originals in the film, Schnabel painted Basquiat imitations. Schnabel's own paintings appear in the film as much as Basquiat imitations. He's all over the place, including contributing to a song on the soundtrack, marred by white men straining to sound like Negroes. All of Schnabel's interests are brought to bear in Basquiat. Rayner wrote, "The baronial interior of his current home appears as Milo's domicile. There are cameos by his parents, his daughters, and his second wife, most of them as Milo's relatives. And while Schnabel doesn't actually appear in the movie himself, the scene of Basquiat and Warhol's collaboration at the factory has, as backdrop, several silkscreen paintings that depict Schnabel as a young, lean man. Paintings that Warhol never made." So, Schnabel's producing and directing a film about Basquiat. Given that Schnabel and Basquiat were rivals, is what it would have been if Joe Frazier had produced and directed a film about Muhammad Ali. It shows. Basquiat's shown as a junkie, stumbling around New York, living in a cardboard box. Yet, Charlene Touchette said he had jobs. A downtown Tribeca clubhouse movie. Schnabel's most telling scene is when Basquiat enters Schnabel's home. Schnabel boasts about his successes, while Basquiat, his reputation as a hot painter on the decline, listens. About 5 minutes is spent on Basquiat picking at a pimple. Basquiat draws a portrait of Schnabel's daughter. Milo picks it up and uses it to put him down, saying to his daughter, "You're prettier than that." It's obvious to the viewers that Schnabel has a family Basquiat doesn't. And after the visit, Basquiat urinates in Schnabel's stairwell. And in an interview with Charlie Rose, describes this as Basquiat marking territory. A curious way of putting it, since scent marking, in this case, using the smell of urine to mark territory, is what animals do. Reminds me of the scene in Critical Condition, a film featuring Richard Pryor during his decline. In one scene, Pryor plays a dog who urinates on a man's leg.
Throughout the Schnabel film, surfers are shown. Couldn't part of the budget have been spent on showing a scene in Hawaii? Because before returning to New York, Basquiat was drug-free while living there. He said, "New York is killing me." Warhol returned to his religious origins after being shot by Valerie Solanas. At the time of his death, a painting of Jesus Christ covered an entire wall of his studio. The Greek Byzantine Church is gravely serious about icons. For this church, icons are windows on heaven. Was the shooting a warning from God that Warhol had substituted the icons of capitalism for those of saints? And why the images having to do with travel? Mobil Oil's Pegasus, Pontiac and Mercedes logos. Are they all having to do with Warhol subconsciously realizing the distance he'd traveled from the church? Were these saints of capitalism false idols, substitutions for the real saints? And that by inserting a motorcycle in Warhol's take on Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, was Warhol giving a sign that he had returned home? Or was the sexually ambiguous individual sitting next to Jesus the image that got his attention? Warhol was attracted to sexual ambiguity. Or was it the eel that appears on the menu? The eel totem fits Warhol. Deceptive. Mistaken for a snake. It is actually a fish. A surrealist gag. One that poet Ted Jones would like. The eel has expensive tastes, like the eel prefers trout and doesn't settle for rock cod. But like Duchamp and his follower Warhol, the eel was a scavenger, profiting from the ideas of others, plagiarizing. Basquiat once served eel to a group of art dealers. With the lunch, was he making a point that he was being scavenged? He said that art dealers had pimped him. And was Warhol's painting The Virgin and Child a way of asking forgiveness for substituting Marilyn Monroe for the Madonna? Around the factory, Warhol was called the Pope. Father. He was given church monikers.
Well, Basquiat was not the only black genius who was encouraged to do drugs in order to increase production. It's like as if one would inject a horse with Lasix in order to improve its performance. Capitalism was greedy for speedy production from artists whose patrons were no longer royalty or the church, but streamers, Spotify, Apple, Amazon. They were under pressure to create new work for sold-out concert tours. For Wall Street, art was just another commodity that had to be sold, a trend that started in 1904. This required artists like Basquiat, Prince, Michael Jackson, and others to go without sleep and depend upon stimulants so they can stay awake, so they can meet demand. So, the muse evolved from a dainty figure from the Victorian era to a figure that would kick your ass, pummel you with blows of creativity that would keep you up nights so as not to miss a note or a lyric or a deadline. Imagine W.C. Handy given 1 week to write St. Louis Blues. Yes. Okay. Right.
Who was that?
Van Helsing. She wants to see me. She wants to know about the progress we're making.
Oh,
I gotta go.
She'll put us on a deadline. I better work on my notes. Let's see. One of his girlfriends was able to tell which drug influenced which painting, whether it was cocaine or heroin. He turned to heroin after cocaine use created a hole in his nose. Except for Page, nobody seemed to care, as long as he was producing art from which others benefited. And so when Basquiat was broke, he sold his body for $10 a pop. In the end, did he sell his soul? He was no longer the enfant terrible who would sell a postcard for 65 cents to purchase a package of cigarettes, which would then be resold by the buyer for $1,000. Warhol said that at one point Basquiat played for the market. Most of the white critics regarded Basquiat as a graffiti artist who benefited from his relationship with Warhol. He resented the title. He said that his friends who were formerly called graffiti artists, like Keith Haring, were no longer called that by critics. Others say that Basquiat resurrected Warhol. Basquiat got Warhol to paint again, which he had abandoned 20 years before their meeting. Now, Warhol's mascot's work is worth more than Warhol's. Basquiat's Untitled 1982 ranks at number 10 among the highest amount paid for a painting, selling for $110.5 million. Warhol's Double Diatribe, 1963, comes in at number 12, $105.4 million. Maybe jealousy is the reason Basquiat was feared and hated. He's still hated. An execrable graphics novel by Julian Village and Soren Mosdell called Basquiat shows that the hatred of Basquiat hasn't subsided. Published in 2019, 31 years after his death, from the first page, which shows Basquiat in his shorts, laying on a bed surrounded by drug paraphernalia, to the last page, which shows that same view, Basquiat is shown as a violent, crazed, angry individual who's so hard to handle that he drives his mother to a mental institution. A thief who robs elderly white women and abuses his white lovers. Only when he snorts coke does he become a monster and is able to paint. While the facial expressions of whites are calm, Basquiat is shown throwing tantrums and his eyes bulging. Very little about his art. The preponderance of the drawings show undressed white women with Basquiat getting high. He's even shown handcuffed to a bed presided over by a dominatrix. Like the imperialist who shat on a Haitian flag, Village substitutes Basquiat's art for his own. You don't have to be a black genius to reach a bad end in the world of art. Look at all the white artists who died of overdoses, suicide, in poverty. There must have been some place Basquiat found peace. A refuge from the art dealer's buyers and the Warhol death cult. My research has found that Hawaii was a place where he could escape the pressure. Basquiat traveled to Hawaii one last time. On his last night on the island, he dreamed about Richard Pryor. Basquiat and Pryor had met in Los Angeles. Fred Hoffman had arranged for Basquiat to paint Richard Pryor's portrait. It was after Pryor's accident that occurred during an episode of freebasing. There was no portrait as a consequence, but Pryor telling Basquiat that he had purchased the film rights to the Charlie Parker story, another genius murdered by New York, inspired Basquiat to do a spate of drawings about the saxophonist.
Who are you?
I'm the new cleaning lady.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, I work the night shift. I thought the employment agency told you.
I thought cleaning woman come during the day.
I work the night shift. I thought the employment agency told you.
Very well. But don't throw anything out. And don't enter the basement. Now, if you would excuse me, I have evidence.
Now let me see what he's hiding in this basement.
But he told me that he loved me and that I could live forever.
This dumb bitch. That man don't love no one but himself. What did they teach you at Bard?
He put 2 punctures in my neck. He says that in Bavaria, this is a sign of affection.
The man had you down there sleeping in a coffin. Didn't that strike you as odd?
He said that he and I were rehearsing for a performance piece.
Oh, goodness. Better call the ambulance.
What's the emergency?
Yeah, I have a girl over here. She's lost a lot of blood. Better get someone over here quick.
Baron.
Boy, go put some clothes on. What's wrong with you? Come here, get up. My blood type is O if you need some. Oh, this art world sure has come a long way. We've come a long way from Jacob Lawrence and Paul White. Oh, and Margaret Keane, my favorite, whose husband was another one of those plagiarists. Did you see in the paper today? A Dutch museum paid an artist $83,000 for a painting. He came back with a blank canvas that had the words. The words, take the money and run. Oh, goodness. Oh, that's better. What happened to you? You missed your art show today.
He locked me in. He said that no one had ever heard of me, and that he was the one that was important. Had me working for 24 hours turning out paintings. Gave me cocaine to keep me awake. He kept feeding me this black stuff, tiny fish eggs. I gotta go to Taco Bell.
Looks to me like you did all of the collaborating.
Yeah, he put some famous logo in a painting like GM for General Motors, and then he'd order me to finish the rest. Then he would leave and come home shortly before dawn. That's him. What's taking him so long?
I had the locks changed.
Let me in! Open the door!
Don't you stay right where you are. Go get your things. I'm taking you out of here.
Somebody open the door! Let me in! I'm locked out!
But
Stay where you are. You heard me. As I always said, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
But he's my mentor!
What?
Oh, okay, oh.
If you dare open that door, I will slap your face. Well, if it isn't Mr. Antonio Wolf.
Where is the bottle? Where is the bottle?
Oh, you're standing in him. Now, respectfully step over that pile of dust outside the door. After all, it was once a baron.
Jean, Richard here. I can see why you would want a sojourn in Hawaii. I had a house there in Maui. I go there to get away from people like NBC censoring me. People leaning on me to give them money, pay their way. Women pestering me. One of them said she was pregnant by me. I had to pay her $600,000. This woman, Jennifer, she made me beat her up, see? Then she had the nerve to sue me. She made me shoot up that car. Then there was Hollywood, depriving me of roles like the one I wanted in Blazing Saddles. They chose Cleavon Little. All the shitty movies they made me do, I'll admit it. Like the one that came out last year, Critical Condition. The critic Janet Maslin said that I looked haggard and agitated in that film. Well, she was on to something. That's because I was shoving all that white lady up my nose. That's why I looked all shriveled up. The Washington Post said I looked emaciated and the makeup couldn't hide where they had to graft my skin. The producer came to my trailer, started cussing at me. Hurt my feelings. He said, Richard, we're losing all this money doing takes because you come in here so high that you don't remember your lines, and then you take all these coke breaks. The budget is tripled because of you. Now, if you black actors can't get it together, we're going to have to bring in some backups, some African and British actors. They are disciplined. They studied at the Royal Academy, and they won't make demands because they are glad to be here. And unlike you, they don't come to the set brandishing weapons. Like when you chased that producer just because he suggested that you play the fairy godmother in Cinderella. Compare that to the Nigerian actress who says she's so happy to be in America. When she goes to the grocery store, she has a choice between a variety of things that she can't buy in Africa. When she walks down the aisles where the cereals are displayed, she sees so many brands to choose from that she just bursts into tears of happiness. Unlike you pushy black Americans, they are innocent. One of them placed teaspoons of cocaine in her tea. She thought it was sugar. You told us to kiss your rich black ass. Well, before it's over, Richard, you might be kissing our rich white ass. With these well-mannered Nigerians on the scene now, you can always be replaced. That warning didn't change my attitude. You think I would have learned my lesson when I caught on fire while freebasing? I was on fire like one of them Buddhist monkeys. Jennifer made me do that. I got sucked in by the Hollywood wall-to-wall sex. It's like I'm on a planet called Vagina, and I'm the only inhabitant exploring every nookie and cranny like one of them moon rovers. But I never blew a hole in my nose like you did. Both me and you wanted to make it big time, like I told Ishmael Reed, I want to get over. There was that time in Berkeley, early 70s. You might call that my graffiti period. It was my most creative period. While you were scribbling graffiti on the walls of the Lower East Side, I was speaking graffiti at small clubs in Berkeley and San Francisco. Happiest period of my life. I hung out with Cecil Brown, Ishmael Reed, Claude Brown, and activists like Huey Newton. Reed and Brown told me that I couldn't bring my corny Las Vegas routine to Berkeley, where they had into a brutal cutting-edge comic aggression. I was free from restrictions. But like you, I wasn't satisfied. Doing small clubs, honing my craft. So I abandoned that scene. Hollywood put restrictions on my art. They gave me so much money I couldn't refuse. You fell into the clutches of Andy Warhol and his cult. He not only signed his name on supermarket products, but he signed his name on his workers because they were no different from the inanimate objects to him. He signed his name on your ass, like someone brand a motherfucking cow. He took advantage of you, Jean, like you was his toy. Like that movie where I played the white man's toy, one of the many shitty movies they made me do. All of these dopey scripts they put in front of me. How did I deal with this fame? A straight-jacketed fame. These producers told me where I could eat, where I could even take a shit, and I did like you. Snorted mountains of white lady. Like you, I started moving in the caviar crowd. Don't be like me, John. Stay away from white lady who made me a slave, made me set myself on fire, fucked up my health. Hollywood is killing me. Don't let New York kill you. Those people have got everything out of you. such a drive. Go to the home of your father's ancestors, Jean-Michel. It's too late for me, but not for you. Not for you. Not for you.
What is Warhol's fascination with beautiful boys? In his films and in his art, there are beautiful boys. It's like a cult. We can go to Hadrian again. Must we? That's where the cult of the beautiful boy begins. I've made some notes. Imagine the scene. Romans moving slowly up the Nile, the longest river in the world. Emperor Hadrian and his lover Antonius, Roman military brass, government officials. They passed the pyramids, the statues of gods with animal heads. Crocodiles slide from embankments. Monkeys swing from banana trees. Hippos rest in the mud. Lizards stand frozen in the sand. Egyptians are in town, preparing for the festival of Osiris. It's October. The year is 130. Hadrian lies in bed with his teenage lover, Antonius. The night before, there was much festivity. Members of the flotilla danced to an Egyptian orchestra, and Hadrian and Antonius lay on pillows and alternately drank wine while nude young men and women danced before them. Antonius was the most beautiful boy in the Western ancient world. He was a Turk who traveled with the emperor throughout the empire. Hadrian would kill a lion for the love of this boy. But then, in the year 130, an event occurred from which the emperor would never recover. The boat had anchored at a temple dedicated to Thoth, the Egyptian god of writing. Suffering from a hangover, the boy got up to go to the bathroom. And as he began to enter the room, which one reached by leaving the cabin and walking along the side of the boat, unsteadily, he was pushed, or stumbled, over the side. Hadrian, this conqueror, the most powerful man in the empire, broke down and cried when informed of the death of his beautiful boy. He could not be consoled. That night, Hadrian saw a star that arose from the spot where they found his body. He named the star after his lover. Antonius became the original superstar. But there's another darker version of what happened. As Basquiat, the radiant child of the downtown art scene of the 1980s, was sacrificed to sustain the dying career of a fading superstar, Antonius was sacrificed so that Hadrian would recover from a mysterious illness. Following the beliefs of the local priests, all beautiful boys who drown in the Nile become gods. Did Hadrian go overboard to express his grief, deifying his beautiful boy? 28 temples were dedicated to him. Like Basquiat of the 2000s, statues of Antonius appeared throughout the empire. His face appeared on coins and on plates. After his death, Basquiat's image appeared on coffee cups, t-shirts, shoes, socks, canteens, shopping bags, etc. Like Antonius and Osiris, both linked by priests because both drowned in the Nile, everybody wanted a piece of Basquiat. Bits of him proliferated like the dismembered god Osiris. Osiris was chopped up into 14 pieces by his assassins so that he couldn't be recovered. All three, Osiris, Antonius, and Basquiat. The first two drowned in the Nile. Basquiat drowned in his vomit.
Once again, Grace, you're wandering way far afield with these analogies to the classics.
I don't think so. A number of Basquiat's paintings include disarticulated body parts. For example, Basquiat's Kings of Egypt shows body fragments, the teeth, torso, and head. And what are we to make? They chopped up Osiris's body. And what are we to make of a painting he left us with? It's called Nile. Was Isis reassembling her husband/brother similar to the revival of Basquiat? Has Basquiat become the beautiful boy of the 2000s, reincarnated as himself? If Basquiat was not familiar with Osiris, he was certainly familiar with Baron Samedi, a Haitian Loa who is a mythological descendant of Osiris. The Guilt of Gold Teeth, a 14-foot wide work which Basquiat painted when he was 22, sold on November 9th, 2021 for $40 million. It includes Baron Samedi, whose Yoruba antecedent is Iku. The painting was done in 1982. Osiris and Baron Samedi both preside over the dead. And maybe he was familiar with the redhead, the mother of the dead, the Irish Loa, the Baron's wife, who rejected advances from the son of Dracula. But like Antonius, some regarded him as a demon, a trickster. He was a demon to the principal whose face Basquiat used as a target for a cream pie. Was his father attempting to get rid of the demon in Basquiat when he stabbed him? Warhol is supposed to have told Gerald Malanga that he imagined himself as the keeper of a male brothel, tending the register in a large dormitory with rows of beds without partitions between them. People would come in and have sex with a boy in a bed and then pay Andy the money on their way out. Could it be said that Warhol sold parts of Basquiat's soul? Was Basquiat sacrificed by those who chose profits over his well-being? Basquiat was the most beautiful of the beautiful boys. And though many women loved him, he was a virgin thrown into the midst of the damned.
John Giorno exposed the dark side of the Warhol legend in his book, Great Demon Kings. Commenting on the book, his fellow Buddhist Jenny Lim called the Warhol culture predatory and decadent. Few escaped this decadence. One who did was Ultraviolet. She writes, "Yes, I have gone through many dangers, tolls, and snares. I've been brought safe, I feel, to tell this story. To tell about the psychological and sociological devastation, the errant activities, the public sex, the hedonism in excelsis, the Anything Goes film, where we had our performers stoned on drugs. Then to make it worse, we exposed our exploits before young students and encouraged them to get as stoned as well. Even though for me, sexual immortality was but the despairing side for the search for emotional security. I have to acknowledge that I participated in a movement that helped lay the basis for the explosion of drug pestilence, hardcore pornography, and the AIDS plague. Most of us have paid a heavy price. Some with our lives, some with our health, others with years squandered. I feel that I was luckier than most. For the 70s, when death brushed me, I repented and found my way to inner peace.
Basquiat wasn't innocent among the vile, who had prostituted themselves and craved new blood. The leeches got fat, bleeding him until there was no more blood to bleed. He could bleed no more. He thought an artistic family would substitute for his mother and father. Everybody whose mother left them knows the feeling. His father kicked him out, and so he ended up in the village. traveled to Hawaii from Haiti instead of returning to New York to die. Suppose that Richard's intervention, coming in the form of a dream, had actually happened. Instead of returning to his killer to New York to be finished off, Basquiat took Richard of the Dream's advice. Suppose that in 1988, he left Maui and returned to the land of his father's ancestors, Haiti, the city of Jacmel, a city surrounded by blue pools fed by waterfalls, a scene of lush vegetation, where Raymond Levin has a popular beach. Suppose that he would have restored an abandoned chateau built in the 1700s. Once a week, he would go into town to buy groceries and a bottle of rum. Makes paper mache masks for carnival. Sometimes joining the carnival. No art dealers, patrons, buyers, critics to bother him, to work him to death. Instead, admiring townspeople are very respectful of his privacy. He would have survived. He would be 61 years old.
Instead, Basquiat returned to New York, the graveyard for black geniuses. Lee Morgan, murdered at Slough's. Charlie Parker, overdosed. Bob Thompson, dead at 28. Was Basquiat a victim of foul play? The critics, the museums, the jealous rivals, members of the Warhol Circle, the women groupies that pampered him and joined him in his self-destruction, unscrupulous art dealers. You don't need to use a weapon to be guilty of foul play.
Are you ready to submit our report to Detective Van Helsing?
I think we have enough.